Sarah Wilson was 32 years old and had never left the small town of Greenfield where she grew up. She worked at the local library, lived in a small apartment, and dreamed of seeing the world. Her life was simple and quiet. Every night before bed, she would look at pictures of faraway places in travel books and think, "One day I will go there." That one day finally came when Sarah's grandmother passed away and left her a small amount of money. Sarah knew right away what she wanted to do. She would go to London, a city she had read about in hundreds of books. She wanted to see the big red buses, the River Thames, and most of all, the Royal Palace with its famous guards. The Royal Guards of London were known all over the world. They wore bright red coats, tall black fuzzy hats, and never, ever smiled. Sarah had seen them in movies and books. They stood very still for hours and did not move, even when people tried to make them laugh. It was their job to protect the royal family and the palace, and they took this job very seriously. 2 weeks later, Sarah was on a plane to London. She could not believe it was really happening. She had never been on a plane before, and her hand shook as she found her seat. The old lady sitting next to her smiled kindly. "First time flying?" the woman asked. "First time everything," Sarah answered with a shy smile. "First time leaving my town. First time on a plane. First time going to another country." "How wonderful," the woman said. "London is a magical place. You will love it." Sarah slept little on the long flight. She was too excited. She looked out the window at the clouds and the ocean far below. When the plane finally landed in London, her heart was beating fast. The city was even bigger and noisier than Sarah had imagined. There were people everywhere, speaking many different languages. The buildings were tall and old, nothing like the small houses in Greenfield. Sarah took a taxi to her small hotel. The driver spoke with a strong accent that made her smile. Everything was new and different. On her first day in London, Sarah was too tired to do much. She walked around the streets near her hotel, ate fish and chips at a small shop, and went to bed early. But on the second day, she woke up feeling brave and ready. Today was the day she would see the royal palace and its famous guards. Sarah put on her best blue dress and comfortable walking shoes. She ate breakfast at her hotel and then followed the map on her phone to the palace. As she walked, she saw the big clock called Big Ben and the giant wheel called the London Eye. But she did not stop. She wanted to get to the palace before it got too crowded. When Sarah finally saw the palace, she stopped and stared. It was huge, with beautiful gates and a large open area in front where tourists gathered. And there they were, the royal guards. They stood perfectly still, wearing their red coats and tall black hats. Their faces showed no emotion. They looked exactly like the pictures in her books. Sarah joined the crowd of tourists. Some people were taking pictures. Others were trying to make the guards move or smile. A young boy made funny faces. A teenage girl told jokes. But the guards did not react. They stared straight ahead, not moving even their eyes. As Sarah watched, she felt a strange feeling. While the other tourists were laughing and treating the guards like they were not real people, Sarah saw something different. She saw men doing a hard job, standing for hours in the hot sun, not allowed to show that they were tired or thirsty or had thoughts of their own. And suddenly, Sarah wanted to know who these men really were behind their serious faces and fancy uniforms. Sarah moved closer to one of the guards. He was younger than the others, maybe in his late 20s. While his face was serious like all the other guards, there was something different about his eyes. They looked sad, almost empty. Sarah felt a strange pull toward this guard. She wanted to know his story. The day was getting hotter, and the crowd around the palace was growing. People pushed and shoved to get the best pictures. A group of loud American tourists arrived. They wore bright clothes and talked in loud voices about making the guard move. "I bet I can make him laugh," said a tall man in a red hat. He walked up to the guard Sarah had been watching and made silly faces. The guard did not move. Then the man told some jokes. Still, The guard did not react. The crowd laughed, but Sarah did not find it funny. She thought it was rude. A tour guide stood nearby, telling a group about the guards. The Queen's guards must stand completely still for 2 hours at a time, the guide explained. They cannot speak, smile, or move, no matter what happens. They are trained to ignore everything around them. Sarah listened with interest. 2 hours was a long time to stand without moving. She wondered if the guard's feet hurt, or if he was thirsty in the hot sun. No one else seemed to care about these things. After the loud tourists moved on, Sarah slowly approached the guard. She stood a few feet away from him, not talking or trying to make him laugh. She just looked at his face, at the sadness in his eyes that no one else had noticed. An old man selling souvenirs near the palace noticed Sarah. He had been watching the guards for many years and had never seen a tourist simply stand quietly like she was doing. Curious, he walked over to her. "You're different from the others," the old man said in a low voice. "Most people just want to make them laugh or move." Sarah turned to the old man. "They are people too," she said simply. "It must be hard to stand there while everyone treats you like you're not real." The old man nodded. "That one you're watching," he said, pointing to the young guard. "His name is James. He's been a guard for 3 years. "How do you know his name?" Sarah asked, surprised. "I sell souvenirs here every day," the old man explained. "I see the same guards come and go. Sometimes, before they start their duty, they buy water or snacks from me. We talk a little." Sarah looked back at the guard named James. Knowing his name made him even more real to her. "He looks sad today," she said. The old man's face became serious. "Yes," he said quietly. "I heard the other guards talking this morning. James got bad news before his shift. His mother is very sick in the hospital." Sarah's heart sank. This man was standing perfectly still, showing no emotion, while his mother was in the hospital. She could not imagine how hard that must be. "That's terrible," Sarah whispered. "And he still has to work." "The royal guards take their duty very seriously," the old man said. "Unless there is a death in the family, they must report for duty as scheduled." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. While other tourists continued to try to make the guards laugh or move, she now understood the real struggle happening behind that serious face. James was not just a man in a fancy uniform. He was a son worried about his mother, forced to hide his feelings and stand still while tourists made fun of him. In that moment, Sarah decided she would not be like the other tourists. She would show James that someone saw him as a real person with real feelings. She did not know exactly what she would do, but she knew she had to do something to acknowledge his pain. The Royal Guard was more than just a London attraction to her now. He was James, a man with a life and a story of his own. Sarah stood nearby, watching James for almost an hour. The sun grew hotter, and sweat appeared on the guard's forehead. Still, he did not move to wipe it away. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, but Sarah could see the pain in them growing deeper. More tourists came and went. A little girl dropped her ice cream near James's shiny black boots, and her mother quickly pulled her away, apologizing. James did not look down or react in any way. Sarah wondered how many strange things he had seen during his time as a guard. The old souvenir seller came back to where Sarah was standing. He held out a bottle of cold water to her. "It's hot today," he said. Sarah thanked him and took a sip. "How long before his shift ends?" she asked, looking at James. "Another hour," the old man replied. "Then another guard will come to replace him." Sarah thought about waiting until James finished his shift. Maybe she could talk to him then. But would that be allowed? And what would she say to him? She was just a tourist from a small town. He probably wouldn't want to talk to her. While Sarah was thinking, a loud group of teenage boys approached James. They were laughing and pushing each other. One of them, a tall boy with spiky hair, stood right in front of the guard. "Hey, soldier boy," the teenager said in a mocking voice. "Is that a real gun you're holding, or are you just happy to see me?" His friends laughed loudly. Sarah felt angry. These boys were being rude, and on a day when James was already hurting inside. The old souvenir seller shook his head, but did not interfere. This kind of behavior happened every day. The teenagers continued to mock James, making faces and telling mean jokes. One of them pretended to punch toward his face, stopping just before hitting him. James did not flinch or move at all. His face remained perfectly calm, but Sarah could see his knuckles turning white as he gripped his gun tighter. That was when Sarah decided she had to do something. She could not stand by and watch anymore. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, moving between the teenagers and James. "Please stop," she said firmly to the boys. "He is a person, not a toy for your amusement." The teenagers looked surprised. Most tourists joined in the fun of trying to make the guards react. They had never seen someone defend a guard before. "We're just having some fun, lady," the tall boy said. "That's what these guys are here for." Sarah shook her head. "No, they're here to do an important job. And she pointed to James without looking at him, is having a hard day already. His mother is sick in the hospital, but he still came to work. Show some respect." The teenagers' faces changed. They looked at James differently now, seeing him as a real person for the first time. The tall boy shuffled his feet, looking embarrassed. "Sorry, man," he mumbled to James. "I didn't know." Then the group walked away, much quieter than before. Sarah turned to look at James. His eyes were still fixed straight ahead, but she thought she saw something new in them. A tiny spark of gratitude, perhaps. She wanted to say something to him, but what? Guards were not allowed to talk to tourists. The old souvenir seller appeared beside Sarah again. "That was a kind thing you did," he said quietly. "I couldn't just watch," Sarah replied. "It wasn't right. In all my years here, I've never seen anyone stand up for the guards like that," the old man said. "They're always seen as part of the scenery, not as real people." Sarah looked at James again. The sadness was still there in his eyes, but maybe it was a little less now. Someone had seen him, really seen him. Someone had acknowledged his pain. And in that moment, Sarah knew what she needed to do next. Something that would break all the rules. Something that might get her in trouble. But something that might give comfort to a man who could not seek comfort for himself. Sarah's heart beat fast as she thought about what she wanted to do. Everyone knew the rules about royal guards. No touching them. No getting too close. Guards were not allowed to react to anything. But rules sometimes needed to be broken. The old souvenir seller seemed to read her mind. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, be careful," he warned in a low voice. "The palace security doesn't take kindly to people who bother the guards." Sarah nodded. "I understand. But sometimes we need to be human first, before following rules." The old man smiled a little. "You remind me of my daughter. She always follows her heart too." He patted Sarah's shoulder and walked back to his small cart of souvenirs. Sarah took a deep breath. She knew she might get in trouble, but that didn't matter now. All that mattered was letting James know that someone saw his pain and cared. She waited until the crowd around James had thinned out a bit. Most tourists were now watching the changing of the guard at another part of the palace. Slowly, Sarah walked up to James. She stood directly in front of him, looking into his eyes. His face remained perfectly still, but those sad eyes told her everything she needed to know. "I heard about your mother," Sarah said softly, so only he could hear. "I'm so sorry. I know you can't respond, but I want you to know that someone cares." James didn't move or blink. He stared straight ahead, as if Sarah wasn't even there. But she knew he had heard her. She could feel it. A palace guard in a different uniform, a supervisor, Sarah guessed, was watching her from a distance. She didn't have much time. "My name is Sarah," she continued. "I'm from a small town in America. My mother was sick last year, and it was the hardest time of my life. I can't imagine having to stand here, unable to show how you feel." The supervisor was walking toward them now. Sarah knew she had only seconds left. I know this isn't allowed, she whispered, but some rules need to be broken. And then, without thinking any more about it, Sarah did the unthinkable. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around James in a gentle hug. The world seemed to stop. Tourists who saw what was happening gasped. Someone took a picture. The supervisor broke into a run, heading straight for them. Sarah closed her eyes. The hug lasted only 3 seconds, but in those seconds, she tried to share all her strength with this stranger who was suffering. When she stepped back, James remained perfectly still. His expression had not changed, but a single tear had formed in the corner of his right eye. It sat there, not falling, as if frozen in time like the guard himself. Miss, step away from the guard immediately. The supervisor had reached them. He was a stern-looking man with a mustache and many medals on his uniform. Sarah stepped back, her heart still racing. I'm sorry, she said. I know I shouldn't have done that. This is completely unacceptable, the supervisor said firmly. Please come with me. As Sarah was led away, she looked back at James. He still stood perfectly still, staring straight ahead. But the tear had finally fallen, leaving a small wet trail down his cheek. Several tourists were now pointing and whispering. No one had ever seen a royal guard cry before. It was as if a statue had suddenly shown life. The supervisor led Sarah through a small side door and into the palace grounds. His face was serious, and Sarah knew she was in trouble. But strangely, she wasn't afraid. She had done what her heart told her was right. Miss, do you realize what you've done? The supervisor asked as the door closed behind them. His voice was stern, but there was something else in it too. Something Sarah couldn't quite identify. Sarah stood tall and looked the man directly in the eyes. Yes, she said simply. I gave a hurting human being what he needed most. The supervisor led Sarah through a long hallway inside the palace. The walls were covered with beautiful paintings of kings and queens from long ago. On any other day, Sarah would have been excited to see inside the palace. But now she was worried about what would happen to her. They entered a small office with a desk and 2 chairs. The room had a window that looked out onto the palace gardens. The supervisor motioned for Sarah to sit down. Please wait here, he said, his voice still stern. Someone will be with you shortly. Then he left, closing the door behind him. Sarah sat alone in the quiet room. She did not regret hugging James, but she wondered if she would be fined or even arrested. Would this get in the newspapers back home? What would her friends and family think? After 10 minutes, the door opened. A woman in a neat black suit walked in. She looked to be in her 50s, with short gray hair and kind eyes. Miss Wilson, the woman said, looking at a paper in her hand. I'm Mrs. Bennet, the Palace Public Relations Director. Sarah nodded, her mouth dry. Am I in big trouble? She asked. Mrs. Bennet sat down across from Sarah. What you did was against the rules, she said. The royal guards must not be touched or distracted while on duty. These rules exist for good reasons. Sarah looked down at her hands. I understand. I'm sorry for breaking the rules, but I'm not sorry for trying to help James. Mrs. Bennet's eyebrows went up in surprise. You know his name. The old man who sells souvenirs told me, Sarah explained. He also told me about James's mother being in the hospital. Mrs. Bennet was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. Yes, that is true. Guard James Wilson received news this morning that his mother had a heart attack. She is in critical condition. James asked to be excused from duty to visit her, but unfortunately, we were short-staffed today because of the royal visit to Scotland. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. That's terrible. He should be with his mother, not standing outside in the hot sun while tourists make fun of him. I agree, Mrs. Bennet said, surprising Sarah. But the palace has traditions and rules that go back hundreds of years. Sometimes these rules can seem cold, but they exist for a reason. So what happens to me now? Sarah asked. Mrs. Bennet looked at Sarah with new interest. That depends. First, I'd like to know why you did it. Why did you hug a complete stranger, breaking rules that could get you in serious trouble? Sarah thought about it. Where I come from, when someone is hurting, you comfort them. It doesn't matter if they're a stranger. James is a person first, and a guard second. I saw his pain, and I couldn't just walk away. Mrs. Bennet nodded slowly. Most people see the guards as part of the palace, like the statues or the gates. They forget there are real people inside those uniforms. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens. In all my 30 years working at the palace, I've never seen anything quite like what happened today. Are you going to arrest me? Sarah asked in a small voice. Mrs. Bennet turned back to her with a smile. No, Miss Wilson, we're not going to arrest you. In fact, something rather extraordinary has happened. She sat down again and leaned forward. After you were brought inside, James's replacement arrived for the changing of the guard. James should have marched back to the barracks with the other guards who finished their shift. But instead, he asked to speak with his commanding officer. Sarah's eyes widened. He broke the rules too. In a way, yes, Mrs. Bennet said. And his request was most unusual. He asked if he could meet you, the tourist who hugged him. He said it was important. Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. And, will they let him? Mrs. Bennet checked her watch. He should be here any minute. His commanding officer granted his request, given the special circumstances. And there's something else you should know. What? Sarah asked, her heart beating faster. James received another call from the hospital just after you were brought inside, Mrs. Bennet said. His mother's condition has improved. The doctors are now hopeful she will recover. Sarah could hardly believe what Mrs. Bennet had just told her. James's mother was getting better, and he wanted to meet her. She felt a mix of relief and nervousness. Do you think the hug had something to do with his mother getting better? Sarah asked. Mrs. Bennet smiled. I don't believe in coincidences, Miss Wilson. Sometimes a small act of kindness can create ripples we never expected. There was a knock on the door. Mrs. Bennet stood up. That must be him now. The door opened, and James walked in. Without his tall black hat and red uniform, he looked completely different. He wore simple black pants and a white shirt. His blonde hair was short, and his face, no longer stiff and formal, showed emotion. He looked younger than Sarah had thought. Guard Wilson, Mrs. Bennet said. This is Miss Sarah Wilson from America. Sarah stood up, suddenly feeling shy. Hello, she said. James looked at her with clear blue eyes. You have the same last name as me, he said, his voice gentle and with a British accent. It was strange to hear him speak after seeing him so silent and still. I hadn't noticed that, Sarah said with a small smile. Mrs. Bennet moved toward the door. I'll leave you two to talk. James, remember you have 30 minutes before you need to report back. After Mrs. Bennet left, James and Sarah stood looking at each other. There was an awkward silence. Please, sit down, James finally said, pointing to the chairs. They both sat. James looked at his hands, then back at Sarah. I wanted to thank you, he said. What you did today. No one has ever done anything like that for me before. I'm sorry if I got you in trouble, Sarah said. James shook his head. You didn't. My commander understood when I explained. Actually, many of the palace staff saw what happened through the security cameras. You've become quite famous here today. Sarah felt her face grow warm. I didn't do it to be famous. I just wanted to help. And you did help, James said seriously. More than you know. He took a deep breath. When I got the call this morning about my mother, I wanted to run to the hospital. But I couldn't. Being a royal guard has been my dream since I was a boy. My mother was so proud when I was accepted. I couldn't let her down by leaving my post. That must have been so hard, Sarah said. James nodded. It was the hardest day of my life. Standing there, not able to move or speak, while inside I was falling apart. He looked directly at Sarah now. And then you came along. Somehow you saw past the uniform. You saw me, James, not just the guard. When you hugged me, it was like someone threw me a rope when I was drowning. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. I'm glad I could help. After that, when I received the call that my mother was improving, it felt like a miracle. James continued. The doctors had been so worried this morning, but suddenly she was responding to treatment. They can't explain it. Maybe she felt that someone was caring for her son, Sarah suggested. Sometimes love travels in ways we don't understand. James smiled, the first real smile Sarah had seen from him. My mother always says that too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. I wrote down my phone number. I'll be going to the hospital as soon as I finish my duties today. But I'd like to properly thank you. Perhaps I could show you around London when my mother is better. There are many places tourists never find. Sarah took the paper, surprised and touched. I'd like that very much. There's something else, James said, his voice more serious now. Something unusual has happened because of what you did today. Mrs. Bennet didn't tell you everything. What do you mean? Sarah asked. James looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The Queen was in residence today. She has security cameras all over the palace grounds. She saw what happened. Sarah felt a chill go down her spine. The Queen saw me hug you. James nodded. Yes, and she's asked to meet you. Sarah's mouth fell open in shock. The Queen wants to meet me. But why? I'm not entirely sure, James admitted. But it's a great honor. The Queen rarely meets with visitors who aren't officials or diplomats. Sarah felt her hands shake a little. Meeting James was one thing, but meeting the Queen of England, that was something she had never dreamed of. What should I do? What should I say? She asked, suddenly feeling very small and very American. James smiled. Just be yourself. That's what got her attention in the first place. There was another knock on the door, and Mrs. Bennet returned. It's time, she said. James, you're free to return to the barracks now. Miss Wilson, please come with me. Sarah stood up, her legs feeling wobbly. She turned to James. Will I see you again before I leave London? I'll make sure of it, he promised. Good luck with Her Majesty. Mrs. Bennet led Sarah through more hallways, these ones grander than the last. The floors were shiny marble, and the walls held even more paintings and fancy decorations. Sarah tried to take it all in, but her mind was racing with thoughts about meeting the Queen. Just a few simple rules, Mrs. Bennet explained as they walked. Address her as Your Majesty the first time you speak to her, and ma'am after that. It's traditional to curtsy, but a small bow of the head is fine too. The Queen will put out her hand if she wants to shake yours. Other than that, just be polite and answer her questions honestly. Sarah nodded, trying to remember everything. Why does she want to meet me? Am I in trouble with her too? Mrs. Bennet's eyes crinkled with amusement. Quite the opposite, I think. The Queen has a special interest in acts of kindness. She believes they're what holds society together. They stopped in front of large wooden doors with 2 guards standing on either side. These guards wore different uniforms than James had worn, fancier, with more medals and decorations. Ready? Mrs. Bennet asked. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. The guards opened the doors, and Mrs. Bennet led Sarah into a beautiful room. It wasn't as big as Sarah had expected. It was cozy, with comfortable-looking chairs and many books on shelves. Through large windows, she could see the palace gardens. And there, sitting in a chair with a small dog at her feet, was the Queen of England. Sarah had seen the Queen on TV and in pictures, but seeing her in person was different. She wasn't tall, and she looked older up close, but her eyes were bright and alert. She wore a simple blue dress and pearls around her neck. Your Majesty, may I present Miss Sarah Wilson from the United States, Mrs. Bennet said formally. Sarah remembered to curtsy, though she wasn't sure she did it right. Your Majesty, she said, her voice coming out as a whisper. The Queen smiled. Please, sit down, Miss Wilson. Her voice was clear and strong. She pointed to a chair across from her. Sarah sat down carefully, trying to sit up straight. The small dog looked at her with curious eyes. "That's Willow," the Queen said, noticing Sarah looking at the dog. "She's very friendly." As if understanding, the dog got up and walked over to Sarah, sniffing her shoes. Sarah smiled and relaxed a little. "So, Miss Wilson," the Queen said, "you've caused quite a stir in my palace today." "I'm very sorry, Your Majesty," Sarah said quickly. The Queen waved her hand. "No need for apologies. I watched the whole thing on our security feed. It was refreshing." Sarah wasn't sure what to say to that. "Tell me," the Queen continued, "what made you do it? What made you hug my guard when everyone knows it's against the rules?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. She wanted to be honest with the Queen. "I saw he was hurting, ma'am. Where I come from, when someone is in pain, you try to help. I didn't think about the rules. I just thought about him as a person." The Queen nodded slowly, studying Sarah's face. "Do you know what I've learned in my many years as Queen, Miss Wilson?" Sarah waited nervously for the Queen to continue. The royal dog, Willow, had settled at Sarah's feet, which somehow made her feel a little braver. "What I've learned," the Queen said, "is that rules are important. They keep order and tradition alive. But sometimes, just sometimes, the human heart must speak louder than any rulebook." She picked up a small bell from the table beside her and rang it. A servant appeared almost immediately with a silver tray holding a teapot and cups. "Tea," the Queen offered. "Yes, please, ma'am," Sarah replied, still hardly believing she was having tea with the Queen of England. As the servant poured the tea, the Queen continued speaking. "My guards are very special to me, Miss Wilson. They represent hundreds of years of tradition, but they are also sons, brothers, fathers, real people with real lives." The servant handed Sarah a delicate teacup. She held it carefully, afraid she might drop it. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, taking a small sip. The tea was perfect. "I watched you today," the Queen said, first standing up to those rude boys, then speaking to James, and finally giving him that hug. "Do you know how many tourists pass my palace gates every day?" "Thousands," Sarah guessed. "Exactly, thousands, and they all see the guards. But very few actually see the men inside the uniforms." The Queen set down her teacup. "That's why I wanted to meet you. You showed remarkable kindness and empathy." Sarah felt her face grow warm. "I just did what felt right." "Sometimes that's the best compass we have," the Queen said. "Now there's something else I wanted to discuss with you." From a folder beside her chair, the Queen pulled out several photographs. She handed them to Sarah. Sarah looked at them in surprise. They were pictures of her hugging James. Someone had captured the exact moment when the tear had formed in his eye. "These pictures have gone quite viral, as the young people say," the Queen explained. "They're all over the social media and news websites. 'Woman hugs royal guard, makes him cry' is the headline." Sarah felt a sinking feeling. "Oh no, poor James. He must be so embarrassed." The Queen smiled. "Actually, the public reaction has been very positive. People are calling it a beautiful moment of humanity. James has received thousands of well wishes for his mother." Sarah relaxed a little. "That's good, at least." "The palace normally doesn't comment on such things," the Queen continued. "But in this case, I'd like to make an exception. I'd like to release a statement supporting what you did." Sarah nearly spilled her tea. "You would?" "Yes. I believe the world needs more moments like the one you created today." The Queen leaned forward slightly. "And I have a request for you, Miss Wilson." "Anything, Your Majesty," Sarah said quickly. "There's a charity event happening tomorrow at the Children's Hospital. I was supposed to attend, but my schedule has become complicated with a visiting Prime Minister." The Queen looked at Sarah with kind eyes. "Would you consider going in my place? The children would love to meet the young woman who showed such kindness to our guard. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Me? Represent you. But I'm just a librarian from a small town. Sometimes the most ordinary people do the most extraordinary things, the Queen said. And you wouldn't be alone. I thought perhaps Guard Wilson might accompany you, once he's visited his mother. She smiled. I've already granted him 3 days of family leave. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. That's very kind of you, ma'am. It's settled then, the Queen said. She rang the bell again, and Mrs. Bennet appeared at the door. Mrs. Bennet will give you all the details. And Miss Wilson. Yes, Mom. Thank you for reminding us all that behind every uniform is a beating heart. 1 year later, Sarah stood in front of a large crowd in London. She wore a simple blue dress and held a big pair of scissors. Next to her stood James, looking handsome in a suit instead of his guard uniform. Behind them was a new building with a sign that read Hearts Behind Uniforms Foundation. I now declare this building officially open, Sarah announced, cutting a red ribbon. The crowd clapped and cheered. Sarah could hardly believe how much her life had changed in just 1 year. After her meeting with the Queen, she had gone to the children's hospital with James. The children loved hearing their story and seeing the famous pictures of the hug that had gone viral. James's mother had recovered fully from her heart attack. She was in the crowd today, beaming with pride at her son. Next to her stood Sarah's parents, who had flown in from America for the opening ceremony. You did it, Sarah, James said quietly, taking her hand as they waved to the crowd. All of this because of one hug. After the hospital visit a year ago, Sarah had extended her stay in London. She and James had spent more time together, visiting his mother in the hospital and exploring the city. When it was time for Sarah to go home, they both knew this wasn't the end. With the Queen's support, they had started a charity. They called it Hearts Behind Uniforms. It helped the families of royal guards, police officers, firefighters, and other uniformed workers who were going through hard times. They raised money to support families during illness or other difficulties. The charity became very successful. People from all over the world donated money. The story of the guard and the tourist touched many hearts. Sarah eventually moved to London to run the charity full-time. And now, Sarah said to the crowd, I'd like to introduce our special guest, who has supported us from the very beginning. A black car pulled up, and the crowd grew quiet. The Queen stepped out, smiling and waving. Even at her age, she looked regal in a bright pink outfit. As the Queen approached the microphone, she nodded at Sarah and James. 1 year ago, she said in her clear voice, a young woman reminded us all of a simple truth. Behind every uniform is a human being with hopes, fears, and loved ones. Today, this foundation stands as a monument to that truth. After the Queen's speech, there was a small reception inside the new building. Sarah walked around, thanking everyone for coming. The old souvenir seller from the palace was there too. He had become a good friend and volunteer for the charity. Did you ever imagine all this would happen when you decided to hug that guard? He asked with a twinkle in his eye. Sarah shook her head. Never. I just wanted to help someone who was hurting. That's how the biggest changes start, the old man said wisely, with one small act of kindness. Later that evening, when the guests had gone home, Sarah and James stood on the small balcony of their apartment near the Thames River. The lights of London sparkled around them. I have something to ask you, James said, suddenly looking nervous. What is it? Sarah asked. James got down on one knee and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple but beautiful ring. Sarah Wilson, you changed my life with a hug. Will you now make me the happiest man in the world by becoming my wife? Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. As they embraced, Sarah thought about how one small moment of kindness had changed everything. She had come to London as a tourist looking for adventure. Instead, she found love, purpose, and a new life. The next morning, the news of their engagement was everywhere. Royal Guard and tourist who hugged him now engaged. The headlines read, "The Queen sent flowers with a note that simply said, 'Sometimes breaking the rules leads to the most beautiful traditions of all.'" And so the story of the guard and the tourist became a reminder to people everywhere. In a world full of rules and boundaries, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to follow our hearts and reach out to someone in need. For behind every uniform, every job, every role we play, we are all just humans needing connection.